Welcome, dear listeners. This is the English Globe, and today we bring you another important conversation about the world we live in, a conversation that is not just about politics or news, but about understanding the forces that shape our future. And our topic today is one that has been on the minds of many analysts, journalists, and ordinary people who follow global events, and that is this big question. Is this the next big game? The United States and Israel versus Iran, Russia, and China?
When we say the words, the next big game, we do not mean a football match or a video game, but rather we mean the way countries compete, the way powerful nations use diplomacy, economics, and sometimes even military strength to protect their interests and influence the world. And the reason people call it a game is because it looks like one side is playing against another. But in truth, this game is very serious. It is about power, peace, and the balance that affects every single person on this planet.
In today's episode, Julia and I will try to explain this situation in simple and clear language so that anyone, even those who are new to world affairs, can understand what is happening and why it matters. Because our goal on this channel is not to tell you what to think or whose side to choose, but rather to give you the tools, the knowledge, and the background so that you can think for yourself. And this is very important when we are talking about global politics that often seems complicated and confusing.
Exactly, Adam. And we want to remind all of you, dear listeners, that this podcast is not about promoting any government or attacking any nation, because here at the English Globe, our focus is on education, and our goal is to present the facts, the history, and the perspectives in a way that respects different opinions and helps us all see the bigger picture. So think of this as a classroom without walls where we learn together and explore how our world is connected.
Before we dive deeper into this topic, we want to kindly ask you to support our channel, because your support helps us continue creating content like this. So please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and share your thoughts in the comments section. And we would love to know where you are listening from. So whether you are in Asia, Europe, Africa, America, or anywhere else, write it down in the comments because it makes us feel connected as a global community, and it helps us understand the diversity of our listeners.
Yes, and please also tell us what you think about today's topic, because maybe you agree with the idea that we are entering a new big game. Or maybe you disagree and believe that cooperation is stronger than conflict. And whatever your opinion is, we would love to read it. And perhaps we will even mention some of your comments in future episodes, because our channel is not only about us speaking, but also about you being part of the conversation.
Now, to set the stage for today's discussion, let us explain why people are even asking this question in the first place. Because after the Cold War ended in the early 1990s, many believed that the world would enter a long period of peace where the United States was the only superpower. But in the last 20 years, new powers have grown, old rivalries have returned, and new alliances have been formed, and this has created a sense that we may be watching the beginning of a new global competition.
The countries we are talking about today, the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, and China, are not just random names on the map. They are nations with long histories, strong interests, and important roles in the international system, and each one of them represents a different set of values, strategies, and visions for the future of the world. So when they interact, whether through cooperation or confrontation, the rest of the world feels the impact, from energy prices to security issues to cultural exchanges.
And this is exactly why this topic is important for all of us, even if you are not living in America, Israel, Iran, Russia, or China, because global politics is like a chain where every link is connected. So when one part of the world faces tension or change, it influences trade, technology, travel, and even education. And that is why we invite you to stay with us throughout this episode, because by the end, you will have a much clearer idea of why experts are calling this situation the next big game.
So, dear listeners, get ready, because in the next sections, we are going to explore the history behind these rivalries, the reasons why these countries take certain positions, and the possible outcomes that may affect the global balance. But remember, our focus is on education and understanding, not fear or division, because knowledge is power. And when we learn together, we become stronger as global citizens who can think critically and see the world with open eyes.
To truly understand why today's situation is described as the next big game, we need to go back into history, because nothing in global politics begins overnight, and what we see in the headlines today is often the result of decades or even centuries of earlier events. So let us take you back first to the Cold War period, which started after World War II, when the world became divided into two major camps, one led by the United States and the other by the Soviet Union, which is now modern-day Russia.
The Cold War was not called cold because the weather was freezing, but rather because the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, did not fight each other directly in one massive war. Instead, they competed in other ways, through military alliances, through economic systems, through technology, and through influence in different parts of the world. And even though there were smaller wars and conflicts in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the United States and the Soviet Union avoided a direct global war. But their rivalry shaped world politics for nearly 50 years.
During that time, alliances became extremely important, because the United States built NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as a military alliance with European and North American countries to defend against Soviet power, while the Soviet Union created its own alliance known as the Warsaw Pact with Eastern European countries. And this division created what was often called the Iron Curtain, a symbolic line that separated Western nations from the Eastern Bloc, and both sides competed for influence across the globe, from Africa to Latin America to Asia.
And in the middle of all of this, the Middle East was already a very important region, because it has always been rich in oil and natural gas, which are resources the modern world depends on, and it was also a place of cultural, religious, and historical significance, which gave it even more weight in international affairs. So countries like Iran and Israel were already deeply connected to the balance of power, because the United States built a strong partnership with Israel, while Iran, before its 1979 revolution, had close ties with the West, but then shifted toward a completely different political vision after the revolution.
The Iranian Revolution of 1979 changed not only the politics of Iran itself, but also the regional and global landscape, because before that, Iran was seen as a close ally of the United States. But after the revolution, the new government became openly critical of American influence and of Israel's presence in the region, and this shift created a long-lasting rivalry. And it is one of the reasons why Iran today is often positioned in the opposite camp from the United States and Israel. And later, this rivalry created opportunities for Russia and China to connect more closely with Iran.
Meanwhile, when the Cold War finally ended in the early 1990s, many experts believed that the United States had won the global competition. Because the Soviet Union collapsed, its allies in Eastern Europe moved toward democracy and market economies, and suddenly it seemed that there was only one superpower left in the world. And this period is sometimes called the unipolar moment, meaning that one country, the United States, was at the center of the international system with unmatched economic, cultural, and military power, while Russia struggled and China was still developing.
But history never stops. And over the past 3 decades, new powers began to rise, and old ones began to recover. Because Russia, though weaker in the 1990s, rebuilt much of its military and influence under new leadership, while China transformed itself from a developing economy into the world's second-largest economy, investing in technology, trade, and infrastructure. And both of these countries began to challenge American dominance, not only in their regions but also globally, which made many analysts begin to say that a new form of competition was slowly returning to world politics.
At the same time, Israel continued to grow as a regional power in the Middle East, developing advanced technology, strong defense systems, and close cooperation with the United States, while Iran kept building its own alliances across the region, supporting groups and governments that shared its vision. And these competing networks of influence made the Middle East one of the most important chessboards of international politics, where the moves of Washington, Tehran, Moscow, Beijing, and Jerusalem all affect not only the region, but the entire global balance of power.
What we see today, then, is not something completely new, but rather a continuation of older rivalries with new players and new strategies, because the United States and Israel are standing on one side as longtime partners, while Iran, Russia, and China find themselves on the other side sharing certain common interests, and even though they are very different countries with different cultures and goals, their cooperation is based on resisting Western dominance, challenging the influence of the United States, and building alternative centers of power in the international system.
And so, dear listeners, when we talk about the next big game, it is important to see that history has shaped this moment step by step, from the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, to the rise of China as a global economic giant, to the Middle East's ongoing struggles and alliances, and by looking at this timeline, we understand that the events we see today are not isolated headlines, but part of a longer story where nations compete for security, resources, and influence. And this is the foundation for the discussion that follows in our next sections.
When we look at the United States in this so-called next big game, the first thing to understand is that the United States has held a unique position in the world since the end of World War II, because it became not only the most powerful military nation, but also the leader of the global economic system, and it created a network of alliances, institutions, and partnerships that gave it influence in every part of the world, from Europe to Asia to the Middle East. And this leadership role is both a source of strength and of responsibility for America.
The United States is often described as a global superpower. But what does that really mean, dear listeners? It means that the country has the ability to project power far beyond its own borders, through its military bases, through its alliances like NATO, through its economic strength and the role of the US dollar, and through its culture, media, and technology. And this global reach allows America to protect its interests, support its allies, and respond quickly to crises. But it also means that the US faces challenges and criticism whenever its decisions affect other nations.
One of the most important aspects of U.S. foreign policy is the protection of allies, and Israel is a prime example of this, because the United States has built one of its strongest and longest-standing partnerships with Israel, providing military support, technological cooperation, and diplomatic backing in international institutions, and this partnership is based not only on strategic interests in the Middle East, but also on cultural and political ties, because many American leaders see Israel as a key partner in promoting stability and security in a region full of challenges.
At the same time, the United States has broader strategic interests that go far beyond Israel, because Washington sees itself as a guardian of what it calls the rules-based international order, which means that it wants to maintain systems of law, trade, and security that are predictable and stable. And from the American perspective, countries like Iran, Russia, and China challenge this order by seeking to build alternative systems or by resisting US influence. So this competition is not only about geography or resources, but also about values, rules, and visions of how the world should be organized.
Another important factor is the U.S. military presence around the globe, because America has more overseas military bases than any other country in history, stretching from Europe to Asia to the Middle East, and this allows Washington to respond to crises very quickly, whether they are natural disasters, local conflicts, or potential threats from rivals. And while some people view this as a stabilizing force that prevents larger wars, others see it as an overextension that creates friction with countries who feel surrounded or pressured by American power.
Economically, the United States also holds enormous influence because the US dollar remains the world's primary reserve currency, which means that international trade, banking, and investment often depend on the American financial system. And this gives Washington tools like sanctions to pressure other countries, tools that are often used against Iran, Russia, and sometimes even China. And while these economic measures can be powerful, they also push rival nations to look for ways to build alternative systems that are less dependent on the American-led global economy.
Another point to remember is that the United States is not a single voice, but a democracy with many different opinions, because decisions about foreign policy are debated in Congress, in the media, and among the people. So sometimes American strategies change depending on who is in the White House or which political party is in power, and this can create both flexibility and inconsistency, because allies and rivals alike sometimes find it difficult to predict whether America will be more focused on diplomacy, on military strength, or on economic tools in its approach to the world.
And when we talk about the US role in this next big game, we must remember that Washington is not only reacting to rivals, but also facing challenges at home, because issues like economic inequality, political division, and debates about America's role in the world all shape how the country approaches foreign policy. And while some Americans believe strongly that the US must remain a global leader, others argue that it should focus more on domestic issues, and this internal debate can influence how much energy and resources America puts into competition with powers like Russia, China, and Iran.
Still, despite these debates and challenges, the United States continues to be seen by many as the central player in global politics, because its economy remains one of the strongest in the world. Its technology sector leads in innovation, its military is unmatched in reach, and its cultural influence through movies, music, and education continues to shape how people think and connect across borders. And all of these factors mean that America is not just another country in the rivalry, but the anchor around which the entire big game revolves.
So, dear listeners, when you hear about the United States in the news, remember that behind every policy decision, there are deeper reasons linked to history, strategy, and vision for the future. And in this podcast, we are trying to open that door for you, to show you why America acts the way it does, why it sees Iran, Russia, and China as challenges, and why its partnership with Israel is so strong. Because only by understanding these layers can we make sense of what analysts mean when they talk about the possibility of a new era of global rivalry.
When we shift our focus from the United States to Israel, we need to understand that Israel is a relatively small country in terms of geography and population, but it plays an outsized role in world politics, especially in the Middle East, and its importance comes not only from its military and technological strength, but also from its unique history, its location at the crossroads of different civilizations, and its long-standing partnership with the United States and Western allies, which gives it influence far beyond its borders.
Israel's story in modern international politics begins in 1948, when the state was founded after World War II. And from the very beginning, it was surrounded by neighbors who often opposed its existence, which created a constant sense of insecurity and a need to defend itself. And over the years, this pressure pushed Israel to build one of the most advanced militaries in the world, with cutting-edge technology, intelligence networks, and defense systems. And this military strength has been central to its survival and its ability to project power in the region.
But Israel is not only strong militarily, it is also a country that has become a hub of innovation and technology, because in fields like cybersecurity, agriculture, medicine, and artificial intelligence, Israeli companies and researchers have developed tools and products that are used worldwide. And this technological leadership has made Israel an attractive partner, not only for the United States, but also for many European and Asian countries. And it has allowed Israel to build relationships that go beyond its immediate security concerns.
Still, The core of Israel's strategic role lies in its relationship with the United States, which has been described as unshakable because Washington provides Israel with military aid, advanced weaponry, and diplomatic support in international organizations, while Israel provides the US with intelligence cooperation and a reliable partner in a region where American interests are always challenged. And this close partnership means that whenever we talk about the United States in the next big game, Israel is almost always considered part of the same side, working together toward shared goals.
One of the reasons Israel matters so much in this rivalry is because of its conflict with Iran, which has become one of the central tensions in the Middle East, because Israel sees Iran's policies and influence in the region as direct threats to its security, while Iran sees Israel as an extension of Western power in the region. And this ongoing hostility has led to proxy conflicts, diplomatic standoffs, and military tensions, making Israel a key player in any conversation about the United States and its rivals, since its security is directly linked to Washington's regional strategies.
And it is important to understand that Israel's influence is not only military or political, but also cultural and symbolic, because the country is home to places that are significant for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which gives it global attention and makes events there resonate far beyond the borders of the Middle East. And this symbolic importance means that conflicts involving Israel are not seen as local issues, but as events that can touch communities around the world, adding another layer to its strategic role in the international system.
Another important point is that Israel has developed new relationships in recent years with countries that were once hostile to it, especially through agreements known as the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations with nations like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. And these new partnerships have allowed Israel to expand its regional network, strengthen its economy, and show that it can find new friends even in a challenging environment. And this also reflects how Israel's strategy is not only defensive, but also diplomatic and forward-looking.
But despite these new partnerships, Israel still faces deep challenges because the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains unresolved, and this issue continues to generate tensions both inside the region and internationally, as many countries criticize Israeli policies while others defend its security concerns. And this conflict makes Israel a subject of global debate, influencing how people view its actions and alliances, and it ensures that Israel will always remain at the center of international attention, even when larger powers like the US, Russia, and China are competing on the global stage.
When we connect all of this back to the next big game, we see that Israel's strategic role is to act as a forward partner of the United States in the Middle East, to provide intelligence, innovation, and military support in a region where American forces cannot always be present directly. And at the same time, Israel represents a challenge to Iran, a partner of Russia and China. So its position becomes part of the wider network of rivalries. And this is why experts often describe the situation as a struggle of alliances rather than just individual nations.
So, dear listeners, when you think of Israel in this story, remember that although it is small compared to giants like the US, China, or Russia, its role is highly significant because of its location, its history, its technological and military capabilities, and its partnerships. And it is one of the key reasons why the United States is so deeply invested in Middle Eastern affairs. Because supporting Israel is seen as both a strategic necessity and a moral responsibility by many American leaders. And this partnership will continue to shape global politics for years to come.
To understand why Iran is often placed on the opposite side of the United States and Israel in this next big game, we need to look at Iran not only as a country in the Middle East, but as a nation with a long history, a strong identity, and a vision for its role in the region. Because Iran is one of the oldest continuous civilizations in the world, and its leaders often describe it as a country that refuses to be controlled by outside powers, which explains much of its resistance to Western influence and its search for independent policies in global affairs.
A turning point in Iran's modern history came in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution, which replaced a monarchy that was closely allied with the United States with a new Islamic republic that defined itself against Western dominance. And ever since that revolution, Iran has seen itself as a voice for independence in the Middle East, while the United States and Israel have viewed it as a challenge to stability and security, and this rivalry has shaped the politics of the entire region for more than 40 years, making Iran a central player in today's global competition.
One of the most important tools of Iran's influence is its vast energy resources, because Iran has some of the world's largest reserves of oil and natural gas, and this makes it a country that cannot be ignored in global markets. Even though sanctions and restrictions have limited its exports at times, and energy gives Iran both economic strength and political leverage, because countries that depend on oil and gas always pay attention to how Iran behaves, and this gives Tehran a seat at the table in discussions about the future of energy and global trade.
But Iran's influence goes beyond energy, because it also uses alliances and partnerships to spread its vision in the region, supporting groups and governments that share its ideology or oppose its rivals. And this has given Iran strong networks in countries like Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, where its allies and partners play important roles in local politics. And from Tehran's perspective, this strategy is about building a shield of influence that protects the country from isolation, while from the perspective of the US and Israel, it is often seen as a destabilizing force that fuels conflict.
Another important part of Iran's perspective is its relationship with Russia and China, which have become increasingly important partners for Tehran, because both Moscow and Beijing share a common interest in limiting American dominance, and by working together they create alternatives to Western-led institutions, whether in trade, security, or diplomacy. And for Iran, this is not only about survival under sanctions, but also about finding allies that respect its independence. So the Iran-Russia-China triangle becomes a powerful counterweight to the US-Israel partnership in the wider global picture.
Iran's nuclear program is another subject that makes it central to world affairs. Because while Tehran insists that its nuclear activities are peaceful and aimed at energy production, the United States, Israel, and many other countries worry that Iran could develop nuclear weapons. And this disagreement has led to years of negotiations, international agreements, and also confrontations. And the nuclear issue remains one of the sharpest points of tension, because it represents not only questions of security, but also questions of trust, sovereignty, and international law in the modern world.
Culturally and ideologically, Iran also presents itself as a leader of what it calls resistance against Western intervention, and this narrative resonates with certain groups across the Middle East who feel that their voices have been ignored by powerful countries. So Iran's influence is not only military or economic, but also symbolic, because it positions itself as a defender of independence and identity. And even though critics argue that its policies create instability, supporters see Iran as a nation that refuses to bow to pressure, which makes its role very different from that of its rivals.
At the same time, we must also recognize the challenges Iran faces, because sanctions have damaged its economy, limited its access to global markets, and created hardships for its people. And these difficulties shape how Iran interacts with the world, because it constantly seeks ways to bypass restrictions, build alternative trade networks, and rely on allies like Russia and China. And this struggle has made Iran more determined to prove its strength, while also creating pressure at home that sometimes fuels debate about whether its strategies are sustainable in the long term.
When we place Iran in the context of the next big game, we see a country that is not a superpower in the same sense as the United States, Russia, or China, but one that plays a crucial role in the Middle East, influencing conflicts, shaping alliances, and connecting with global powers that share its interests. And while Washington and Jerusalem see Tehran as a rival, Moscow and Beijing see it as a valuable partner, so Iran becomes the bridge that connects regional conflicts to global competition, making it far more important than its size alone would suggest.
So, dear listeners, as we finish this part of our discussion, remember that Iran's perspective is shaped by its history, its revolution, its energy resources, its alliances, and its vision of independence, and whether one sees it as a destabilizing actor or as a defender of sovereignty, there is no doubt that it plays a key role in the balance of power. And that is why it cannot be ignored in conversations about the United States, Israel, Russia, and China. Because Iran is one of the main reasons why people are asking if we are truly entering the next big game.
Dear listeners, before we move forward with today's complex issue, let us take a moment to remember that alliances are never formed overnight. They are built on history, culture, shared experiences, and often on conflict. If we look at the United States and Israel, their partnership dates back to the mid-20th century. After the creation of Israel in 1948, the U.S. quickly became one of its strongest allies. This relationship grew over decades, driven by political, military, and cultural connections that shaped the Middle East's modern landscape.
That's right, Adam. And when we talk about alliances, we also have to think about Iran, Russia, and China, who have gradually found themselves drawn closer together. Iran, after years of sanctions and pressure from the West, naturally sought friends who could provide economic and military support. Russia, especially after its own tensions with Western countries, became a natural partner. And China, with its growing global ambitions, found common ground with both. Together, this formed an informal but powerful group that challenges the US-led order.
To make it even clearer, let's look at the Cold War era. During that time, the world was essentially divided into two major blocks: the US and its allies versus the Soviet Union and its allies. Although the Cold War ended with the fall of the Soviet Union, the idea of blocks of power never really disappeared. What we see today might not be identical, but the pattern is strikingly similar. We once again have powerful nations gathering their partners, competing for influence, and trying to shape global politics according to their vision.
That comparison helps a lot, Adam. It shows us that history often repeats itself, but in slightly different ways. Unlike the Cold War, today's world is far more interconnected because of globalization. Trade, technology, and information flow across borders faster than ever before. This means that while alliances still exist, they don't function exactly like they did decades ago. Countries may disagree on some things, but still cooperate on trade or climate change. This makes the situation complex, layered, and much harder to predict.
Absolutely, Julia. And dear listeners, that is why discussions like this are so important. They help us understand not just the headlines, but the deeper roots of global events. Many people see a news story about a military exercise or a political statement and react with fear or confusion. But when you look at the history, you realize these moves are part of a much bigger pattern. And knowing that bigger picture helps us think more clearly and avoid jumping to conclusions.
Well said, Adam. Before we move to the next part, let us remind our dear listeners, if you are enjoying this discussion, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe. It helps us grow and bring you more thoughtful conversations like this. Also, we would love to hear from you. Please tell us in the comments where you are listening from and share your opinion about today's topic. Do you think these alliances are a step toward cooperation, or do they increase the risk of conflict?
When we talk about the next big game, we cannot ignore China, because over the last few decades, it has transformed from a developing country into a global powerhouse, reshaping economics, politics, and military strategy across the world. And this rise is not sudden, but the result of careful planning, decades of investment in infrastructure, education, technology, and manufacturing, and a clear vision to expand influence both regionally and globally, making China a central player in modern geopolitics.
Exactly, Adam. China's growth is remarkable because it has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty while also becoming the world's second-largest economy. And this economic strength gives it tools to influence other countries through trade, investment, and development projects, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, which connects Asia, Africa, and Europe through infrastructure, trade, and cultural exchanges, creating new opportunities and partnerships while also expanding China's strategic reach.
Beyond economics, China has been modernizing its military at an unprecedented rate because its leadership understands that economic influence alone is not enough to secure its interests. And the People's Liberation Army has invested heavily in advanced weaponry, cyber capabilities, and naval power, particularly in the South China Sea and near Taiwan, which demonstrates that China is serious about protecting its territory, expanding its influence, and asserting itself as a dominant regional power that can also challenge the global status quo.
And when we look at China's global partnerships, Adam, we see an interesting pattern. Beijing has been strengthening ties with Russia, Iran, and other countries that share its strategic goals, often in response to what it perceives as American-led pressure or intervention. This cooperation is not always formal alliances, but rather coordinated policies in trade, technology, and diplomacy. And together these countries present an alternative vision of global order, where power is more distributed and challenges to Western dominance are legitimate and increasingly influential.
Another dimension of China's rise is technology, because Beijing has invested heavily in AI, telecommunications, renewable energy, and space programs. And these advances give China not only economic leverage but also strategic tools, as technology increasingly determines military, diplomatic, and economic power in the 21st century. And countries around the world watch closely how China uses innovation to expand influence, protect its interests, and sometimes challenge global norms established by the United States and its allies.
China's influence is also visible in the economic dependency of many developing nations, because Chinese loans, trade agreements, and investments create relationships that are mutually beneficial but also strategically important. And while some critics worry about debt traps or political influence, supporters argue that these projects help countries develop and connect to global markets. And this duality reflects China's pragmatic approach, using economics, diplomacy, and soft power together to advance national interests, without necessarily resorting to direct military confrontation.
Of course, China also faces significant challenges, because rapid growth and global expansion bring scrutiny, resistance, and domestic pressure, including economic inequality, environmental concerns, and political expectations, and balancing these internal challenges with global ambitions is a delicate task for Beijing. But despite these obstacles, China's long-term strategy is clear: expand influence, protect sovereignty, and ensure a central role in shaping the rules and institutions that govern the world in the decades to come.
And this is why China's rise matters to the United States, Israel, Iran, and Russia, because Beijing's policies intersect with every aspect of the next big game, from trade and energy security to military strategy and regional conflicts. And as China continues to grow, its interactions with both allies and rivals will shape the trajectory of global competition, meaning that understanding China is essential for anyone trying to grasp the current balance of power in the world.
So, dear listeners, when you hear analysts talking about China as a rising superpower, remember that its influence is not just about military strength or large population, but about economic strategy, technology, partnerships, and long-term planning. And this combination of factors makes China not only a competitor to the United States, but also a key partner for countries like Russia and Iran, and a central figure in what some are calling the next era of global geopolitical rivalry.
And as we continue our discussion in the following sections, we will examine the flashpoints and hotspots where these powers meet, clash, or cooperate, because it is in these real-world interactions that the abstract strategies of the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, and China come to life, and where ordinary people around the world can feel the impact of decisions made far from their own homes, which makes understanding these dynamics so crucial for everyone, not just experts or policymakers.
As we move forward, dear listeners, it is crucial to understand that this so-called next big game is not only about countries forming alliances, but also about specific regions and conflicts where these alliances play out. Because the global balance of power is often tested in hotspots where interests collide, tensions rise, and decisions made by leaders can have immediate consequences, not just for the countries involved, but for the entire international community. And today, we will examine the key flashpoints that are most frequently discussed by analysts and experts.
Absolutely. Adam, let's start with the Middle East, which has always been one of the most sensitive regions in global politics, because it is home to vast energy resources, strategic shipping routes, and a history of conflict that dates back centuries. And in today's context, the rivalry between Israel and Iran is one of the central flashpoints, where both nations use military, diplomatic, and proxy strategies to influence the balance of power. And this rivalry also draws in the United States, Russia, and increasingly China in ways that affect global stability.
In addition to Israel and Iran, Syria remains a major hotspot because it has become a meeting point for several competing powers, with Russia providing military support for the Syrian government, Iran supplying regional influence and allied militias, and the United States maintaining limited presence and alliances with local groups. And these overlapping interests mean that even small events in Syria can have large ripple effects, influencing energy prices, migration, and regional security, and drawing international attention to a country that would otherwise be geographically small but strategically significant.
Another critical hotspot is the South China Sea, which Adam mentioned earlier when discussing China's rise, because this body of water is one of the busiest trade routes in the world, through which trillions of dollars in commerce pass each year. And China's claims over most of this sea and its construction of artificial islands with military facilities have created tensions with neighboring countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, while the United States conducts freedom of navigation operations to ensure open sea lanes. And this interaction brings military and diplomatic pressures into a highly volatile environment.
The Persian Gulf also deserves attention as a critical flashpoint because it is home to some of the world's largest oil reserves and strategically vital shipping channels, and tensions between Iran and its neighbors, supported by the United States or other allies, create a situation where even minor incidents, such as attacks on tankers or drone operations, can escalate rapidly, affecting global oil prices and international security. And this region serves as a testing ground for military strategies, alliances, and technological capabilities of multiple nations involved in the wider global game.
Moving beyond these regions, Eastern Europe has also become a significant hotspot, particularly with the resurgence of Russia as a global power, because the post-Cold War security framework in Europe has been challenged by Russian actions in Ukraine, Georgia, and other neighboring countries. And this has led NATO, led by the United States, to strengthen military presence and cooperation in Europe, creating a scenario where flashpoints are not only local, but can potentially escalate into broader confrontations that involve multiple global players, including China, in terms of strategic alignment and economic interests.
Another area of concern is the Taiwan Strait, because Taiwan represents both a political and economic flashpoint, with China claiming sovereignty over the island while the United States maintains unofficial support and arms sales, creating a delicate balance that requires constant diplomacy and military vigilance. And the consequences of miscalculation in this area could ripple across the Asia-Pacific, affecting trade, regional alliances, and global perceptions of stability, making it a key hotspot that connects regional ambitions to the larger global competition we have been describing throughout this podcast.
Cybersecurity and space are also emerging as new flashpoints in this global game, because conflicts are no longer confined to physical territory, and countries like the United States, China, Russia, and even Iran have developed capabilities to disrupt communication networks, financial systems, and satellite operations, which means that a conflict can occur without conventional armies facing each other, and yet have devastating effects worldwide, demonstrating that modern flashpoints are multidimensional and require understanding not only of geography, but also of technology, economics, and global interdependence.
Additionally, trade routes and economic corridors, such as those created by China's Belt and Road Initiative, or critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, and major ports in Southeast Asia, have become strategic hotspots because any disruption, whether from conflict, political tension, or natural disasters, can impact the global economy, energy security, and the daily lives of millions of people. And these economic flashpoints are often linked to military presence, alliances, and diplomatic maneuvers, showing how interconnected modern global competition has become.
So, dear listeners, when we talk about these flashpoints, it is important to remember that each region or situation is part of a larger network of interactions that defines this next big game. Because the decisions made in the Persian Gulf, the South China Sea, Eastern Europe, or Taiwan can affect countries thousands of miles away. And understanding these hotspots helps us appreciate why analysts are so concerned with alliances, strategies, and influence, and why global stability depends not only on the choices of leaders, but also on informed awareness by people around the world.
Finally, it is essential to realize that these flashpoints are not just about conflict. They are also about negotiation, cooperation, and balance. Because countries like the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, and China also engage in diplomacy, trade agreements, and multilateral forums to manage tensions and find solutions that prevent escalation. And it is this constant push and pull between competition and cooperation that makes modern geopolitics so dynamic, complex, and crucial for everyone to understand. Because the outcomes of these hotspots influence not only governments, but the lives of ordinary citizens globally. As we approach the end of our discussion, dear listeners, it is important to consider the possible scenarios that could unfold from this so-called next big game, because understanding potential outcomes helps us analyze current actions, anticipate risks, and think critically about the future of global politics. While no prediction can be certain, we can explore a range of possibilities, from cooperation to conflict, and see how these might impact the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, China, and the rest of the world.
That's right, Adam. One possible scenario is increased cooperation and negotiation, where nations prioritize diplomacy, economic engagement, and conflict resolution over confrontation. And in this scenario, even countries with competing interests, like the United States and China, or Israel and Iran, might find common ground on issues such as trade, climate change, nuclear security, and regional stability, which could reduce tensions, create trust, and lead to agreements that benefit not only these countries, but also global stability and prosperity.
Another scenario involves limited regional conflicts, or proxy wars, where nations support allies in localized disputes rather than engaging in direct confrontation with each other. And examples include ongoing tensions in the Middle East, cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure, or naval maneuvers in strategic waterways. And while these situations may remain controlled, they can still create instability, disrupt trade, and impact millions of civilians, demonstrating that even indirect confrontations have real consequences in a connected world.
A third scenario that experts often discuss is the intensification of strategic competition without outright war, which could take the form of economic rivalry, technology competition, and diplomatic maneuvering, such as sanctions, trade barriers, innovation races in artificial intelligence, and influence campaigns in global organizations. And while these actions avoid direct military conflict, they can reshape alliances, economic dependencies, and geopolitical influence, potentially creating a world where power is more fragmented and unpredictable.
Of course, we cannot ignore the possibility of major conflicts, although we hope they are avoided because tensions in hotspots like the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, Eastern Europe, or the Persian Gulf could escalate, especially if miscalculations, accidents, or political pressure push countries to respond militarily, and in this worst-case scenario, the consequences could include regional devastation, disruptions to global trade, and international intervention, highlighting the importance of careful diplomacy, communication, and crisis management.
In addition to these broad scenarios, we also need to consider the role of emerging technologies, because cyber attacks, space-based assets, artificial intelligence, and advanced military systems can dramatically change outcomes, making conflicts faster, less predictable, and sometimes less visible. And nations must therefore invest not only in traditional military capabilities, but also in cybersecurity, technology governance, and international agreements to prevent accidental escalation and maintain global stability.
Another factor that could shape outcomes is public opinion and domestic politics, because in democratic countries like the United States, leaders must consider voters' preferences, media coverage, and social reactions when making foreign policy decisions, and in other countries, internal pressures such as economic hardship, political dissent, or social movements can influence government actions, which means that the global game is shaped not only by strategy and alliances, but also by the voices, expectations, and reactions of ordinary citizens around the world.
Climate change and resource scarcity could also influence the next decade of international relations, because water, energy, food, and arable land are increasingly strategic considerations, and nations that secure resources or cooperate in managing them may gain advantages, while failure to address environmental challenges can create instability, migration, and competition. And this adds an additional layer to the possible scenarios, reminding us that the global game is not only about military or political power, but also about sustainability, resilience, and collective responsibility.
When we examine economic trends, we see yet another dimension of possible outcomes, because the interconnected global economy means that financial crises, trade disputes, or sanctions can ripple across borders, impacting allies and rivals alike, and nations may use these economic tools strategically to influence behavior, strengthen partnerships, or weaken adversaries. And understanding this interplay between economics and geopolitics is essential to analyzing how the next big game might unfold, and who could emerge as the most influential players.
Finally, dear listeners, it is important to understand that these scenarios are not mutually exclusive, because elements of cooperation, competition, and localized conflict can occur simultaneously, creating a complex and dynamic environment where outcomes are uncertain and constantly evolving. And while analysts attempt to predict trends, the reality is shaped by the choices of leaders, the reactions of populations, technological developments, environmental challenges, and unforeseen events, making this the most intricate and multi-layered era of global politics we have seen in decades.
So, in conclusion for this section, the future of the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, and China is not predetermined, and the next big game could take many forms, from peaceful cooperation to high-stakes competition or even localized conflicts. And our role as observers and citizens is to understand the patterns, think critically about the choices nations make, and remain informed, because the decisions made in these flashpoints will affect not only governments and armies, but the lives of people around the globe.
And dear listeners, before we move to our final section, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe. We would love to hear your opinions. Where are you listening from? What do you think about the scenarios we discussed today? Your comments help us understand the global perspective and engage in meaningful conversation. So please share your thoughts as we continue exploring the complex, fascinating world of international relations and the next era of global dynamics.
As we wrap up today's podcast, dear listeners, it is important to reflect on what we have explored throughout this long discussion, because understanding global politics is not about predicting the future with certainty, but about recognizing patterns, analyzing relationships, and considering the complex factors that shape decisions made by nations such as the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, and China. And by doing so, we can better appreciate the dynamics of power, influence, and strategy in today's interconnected world.
Exactly, Adam. One of the first takeaways is that alliances matter, and they are not static. Countries like the United States and Israel, or Russia, Iran, and China build partnerships based on shared interests, history, and strategic goals. And these alliances influence not only military, economic, and technological capabilities, but also the perception of global power, because other nations often align themselves, negotiate, or react depending on how they see these relationships evolving, which can shift the balance of influence in unexpected ways.
Another key point is that geography and resources remain crucial. Strategic regions such as the Middle East, Eastern Europe, the South China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait act as flashpoints where rivalries become visible, and energy resources, trade routes, and territorial claims create tangible reasons for tension or cooperation, reminding us that while modern conflicts often include cyber or technological dimensions, physical location, resources, and logistics continue to play a central role in shaping outcomes and strategies in the global game.
We also learned that technology is a game changer. From artificial intelligence and cybersecurity to space operations and advanced weaponry, technological innovation is no longer just an advantage, but a necessity for national security, influence, and global strategy, because countries that lead in technology can shape markets, protect their interests, and project power beyond their borders, which is why nations like China, the United States, and Israel invest heavily in research, development, and innovation to maintain an edge in both military and economic arenas.
History, culture, and ideology cannot be ignored either, because countries act based not only on current interests, but also on historical experiences, national identity, and political values, and these factors often influence how nations interpret threats, opportunities, and relationships. And understanding this context helps explain why countries behave in ways that may seem unpredictable at first, but are deeply rooted in long-term perspectives, experiences, and strategic visions that guide policymakers and leaders in their decision-making.
Furthermore, we observed that possible scenarios are varied and complex. Cooperation, competition, localized conflicts, and emerging threats can all occur simultaneously, creating a dynamic environment where outcomes are uncertain. And while we hope for diplomacy and negotiation to prevail, it is important to recognize the risks and understand how nations may respond under pressure, because being informed about these potential scenarios allows citizens, analysts, and policymakers to make better decisions and contribute to a more stable and peaceful world.
Another important takeaway is the interconnection between domestic politics and international strategy. Leaders must consider public opinion, economic conditions, and social pressures when making foreign policy decisions, and this means that global events are influenced not only by strategic calculations, but also by voters, media, and societal expectations, making the international game as much about internal stability and governance as about military power, alliances, or regional influence, which adds an important human dimension to global analysis.
Energy, economics, and trade are also central to understanding global power. Control over resources, investment in infrastructure, and participation in global trade networks allow nations to project influence, create dependencies, and strengthen alliances, while economic sanctions, trade barriers, and financial diplomacy can act as tools to pressure rivals or shape behavior without direct conflict, demonstrating that the global game is multidimensional, where economic strength and strategic planning are as important as military capability.
Dear listeners, it is also essential to remember that citizens play a role too, because being informed, critical, and aware of global events allows people to participate meaningfully in discussions, advocate for policies, and understand the impact of decisions made by governments far from their own homes. And by staying engaged, we contribute to a world where public understanding supports diplomacy, cooperation, and thoughtful decision-making, which is ultimately the most effective way to reduce conflict and promote stability in international relations.
So, in conclusion, the next big game between the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, and China is not a simple story of confrontation or inevitable war. It is a complex web of alliances, strategies, technology, economic interdependence, history, and geography, where every decision has multiple consequences, and where cooperation, negotiation, and competition coexist, meaning that the future is not predetermined but shaped by choices, awareness, and thoughtful engagement from leaders and citizens alike.
Finally, dear listeners, we want to thank you for joining us on this long and detailed journey, because understanding global politics takes time, attention, and curiosity. And by listening carefully and thinking critically, you are taking the first step to better grasp the forces shaping the world today. And we encourage you to continue following these discussions, asking questions, and sharing your thoughts, because informed conversations are the foundation of a more connected, aware, and peaceful global community.
And as always, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe. Please share where you are listening from and give us your opinion on today's topic. Your engagement helps us bring more educational, informative, and thoughtful content to YouTube, and it allows us to understand perspectives from around the world, making this conversation truly global and participatory, which is exactly what learning about international relations is all about.
Thank you once again, dear listeners, for staying with us through this detailed exploration of the next big game. We hope it has helped you see the bigger picture, understand the key players, and appreciate the complexity of global dynamics. Remember, knowledge is power, and awareness is the first step toward shaping a more informed and thoughtful world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.